Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the final regular season episode of the DFO Fantasy Podcast. I'm Brock Stegan. We got Dylan D. Berthium with us here. No Michael Beebs Bondy. He is on a plane headed out west, but we did pre-record some of his responses earlier. So Beebs will be chiming in throughout the show. We'll throw it over to his pre-recorded audio. But D, the season is come and gone here. We have 2 days left in the regular season as of this recording. The playoffs picture is pretty much solidified outside of the Montreal Canadiens and the Columbus Blue Jackets. When the listeners hear this tomorrow, though, we should likely have an answer there. How did you do? How did you fare overall in fantasy this season?
We will see how these last few games wrap up. Overall, we got a chance to take home one title. Went down in the semis in 2 leagues, quarters 1 league, and then missed in the dynasty, as we spoke about earlier. So I can't complain overall. It's all about kind of, giving yourself a chance. And when it comes down to it, it's often, much of a coin flip in the fantasy playoffs. So we were right there. Could have easily taken a couple more. I'd cried to you about this a bit already, but if Talbot had managed to hang on to that shutout against the Panthers last Sunday, I would be looking at potentially taking home another title. So right now it's just the one in a good spot, but we'll see. We got 2 days or 2 nights of hockey left. So hopeful that we can at least get one trophy up on the mantle. Can't complain overall, but it was, not as good as it looked like it could have ended up being. But any season with hardware is a successful season.
I am looking likely to go 3 for 3 on third place finishes. Just 3 third place finishes, get like your money back, maybe a little bit, make a little bit of coin. So probably not going to lose any money this year, but certainly not making much either. Beebs, what about your fantasy season?
Well, let's just say I wish you were there attending the final, Brock, because my team decided they would all have a rest week. If there's ever been a case for why you should not let your fantasy hockey season go to game 82, I think my team might be an example of that. We got a couple Colorado boys, which we know what's happening out there. We had Jake Gensel, he had a baby, and now we're just having in and outs in Florida. So I will say I'm waving the white flag with a couple of games left here. We had a very ugly second Monday, which kind of pushed some categories we didn't need. And I have 3 shutouts against me right now, I believe. So that's really not helping anything when that happens, but it's okay. We made it to the finals. We beat our boss, and I could flex that for about the next couple months. So that's really all I needed. So I got my win, but congrats to the dude who is eventually going to take the trophy yet again in our other league. So it's too bad. I wanted to knock him off the throne. Well, he's taken 2 of the last 3. I took the one in between. So this was a battle for the ship here. But in my other leagues, I got knocked off in the semis. I'm in a 32-man 32-team 50-man roster league, and we lost in the final or in the semis in that one. I was very proud of that team because it was an absolute gong show, and that was good. And then our other one, we were out in the semis as well. So we just got one dog in the fight. But it's I will say it's bittersweet. I don't think anyone enjoys waking up every morning and just looking at the last day's stats as much as I do. So I don't know what I'm going to do with myself for the next couple months, as we don't have any fantasy hockey here. But it's okay. We'll figure it out. There's other sports. There's sun in the sky, and we'll figure something out.
Let's get to our consensus fantasy hockey podcast awards. We do this the midseason. We do at the end of the season. Same awards as always: fantasy hockey MVP, best defenseman, best goalie, biggest draft value, biggest draft bust, and biggest best free agent pickup overall. So we'll start with our fantasy hockey MVP, which was Connor Hellebuyck of the Winnipeg Jets. We all were kind of around the same thing. He was all near the top of our ballots. You had him at number 1. Beebs had him at number 2. I had him at number 3. Ultimately, I went with Nikita Kucherov as my fantasy hockey MVP, and probably for a bit of a different reason. Like, yeah, he had a great year, very Nikita Kucherov-like year, kind of what you were expecting on draft day. But it was his performance in the fantasy hockey playoffs that kind of solidified it for me. If you had him on your roster, you were likely headed to the championship or likely picked up some hardware. So 28 points in his last 15 games during the fantasy hockey playoffs, 9 goals, 19 assists during that stretch. Just went absolutely nuclear at the right time of year. So yeah, him and David Pastrnak, same thing. I had Pastrnak number 2 for much of the same reason. Pastrnak was just red hot, 24 points in 14 games during the fantasy hockey playoffs. Just got hot at the right time of year, but also had really good regular season as well. So that was just kind of the tiebreaker for me. Hellebuyck, obviously, just an unbelievable year, a transformative type pick in fantasy hockey this season. Why was Hellebuyck kind of the number 1 guy overall for you?
Well, I mean, he was just far and away. I mean, he's looking at taking home the triple or the quadruple crown for goaltending, which is just insane, right? I think he deserves some Hart Trophy consideration. He's going to end up leading in save percentage, goals against average, wins, and shutouts at the position. In category leagues, especially, like that's just such a massive boost to have to your team. I talked a lot about in the preseason how I don't love investing early at the position. And, there's a lot of other guys that were going early on in drafts that if you did, certainly came back to bite you. But Hellebuck is the one who really delivered and in those category leagues because goaltending is weighted so heavily, a little too heavily for, maybe 3 guys on your roster, in my opinion. But it's just such a leg up. He's, getting you to a point where you're almost consistently going to be taking home all those goaltending categories. And then you only need to steal, 2 or 3 of the skating categories to get it done each week. So it's just such a leg up on the rest of the league, just in terms of how he performed and, the step down to the rest of the goaltending. And, he's getting ready to make a 60-second start tonight as well. So just an absolute workhorse, and performance never really dipped throughout the entirety of the season. So I think it's well deserved. And if you did take the risk in investing early at the position, just hopefully you got Hellebuck, because like I said, he was the one that really, really delivered and gave you just such a leg up on the rest of your fantasy league.
I had him in our big money league, and he was great to own throughout the season. The funny thing, when you look at Hellebuck's ADP at 24.2, you could have conceivably started your draft with Nathan MacKinnon, who's the number 1 ranked fantasy player overall, and then in the second round picked Connor Hellebuck and had by far and away the best skater, by far and away the best goalie, and would have been a pretty good start to your fantasy hockey season. Beebs, you had Leon Draisaitl number 1 overall. Why was he your fantasy hockey MVP?
Yeah, this one was super close, and I will admit it was a 1A, 1B. Connor Hellebuck filled every goaltending category you needed, and he was just elite in all ways possible, to the point where we might see him win the Hart Trophy this year. So maybe I'm silly for suggesting Leon is my fantasy MVP, but I just loved what he did across the board. We saw better point production from Nathan MacKinnon, Nikita Kucherov, but they didn't quite have the goals like Leon Draisaitl had. 52 goals to lead the NHL was just out of control. We love that type of production. Then 106 points to go with it is very nice. He was a category filler across the board, as I mentioned, 240 shots. And if you're crazy and in a league that has plus minus like I am, the plus 34 was very nice as well. So as hard as it was to not give the award to Hellebuck here, I felt like I had to be the one person who didn't have him there. So I think that was why I had Draisaitl. I really wanted to give the boy his flowers, because every year we talk about the MacKinnons and the Kucherovs and how they're kind of the MVP, how they are, because they always do that. So here's Draisaitl stepping in, filling all categories. So there you go, Leon. I wanted to give you your due. And he ended up 4th ranked in standard category leagues in Yahoo. Definitely hit related, but and some of the shots there, he has a little bit less than the other fellas. But like I said, filling those extra goal categories is what did it for me. So Leon, you're my fantasy MVP.
Let's move it along to our fantasy hockey best defenseman. It was a unanimous decision up top for us. It was Cale Makar, undoubtedly. Just another ridiculous season out of him. But our runner-up was Zach Werenski. We're not going to dive in too much on Zach Werenski because his name is going to come up a little bit later in the show. But Beebs, you are a resident Avalanche fan. Why was Cale Makar the unquestioned number 1 best defenseman this season?
I was so worried because at our mid-season show, we all pretty much went Werenski. I believe it was a no-doubter, but we did see a slow stretch from Werenski closer to the end. Not necessarily slow, but slower than what we were getting. And while he did that, Cale Makar just continued to chug. If I'm going to get all excited about Leon Draisaitl's 50 goals, I have to get very excited about Cale Makar's 30 that he put up. Next highest was our boy Zach Werenski, but he had 22. So the 8-goal difference there, clearly a big factor. 12-point difference for Makar. He had 92. Werenski had 80, and 18 plus minus difference. So all things that really came into play there. The only category where Werenski really takes the cake, and we all know where this is going, is shots on goal, because Werenski is just a freak at 295. But realistically, Makar was shooting the lights out as well. He had 246. So I will take the 8 extra goals, the 12 extra points, for 50 or so odd less shots. That's perfect for me. Cale Makar, you are the fantasy defenseman MVP, and you will likely be that for the next 10 years. I'm just going to lock that in for us.
I think it's pretty safe to say. Do you have anything to add, D, on why you think Cale Makar is just far and away the best defenseman this year?
No, I think it's just pretty similar to Hellebuck. He's really just leading the position across the board, right? And the goal scoring that he gives you, again, it's just, he's in his own tier at the position at this point. And so it is an easy decision. But again, if you took the risk to invest highly at a position that, does come with the risk if he doesn't have a season like this, that ADP is probably not paid off, but it did. And again, just gives you such a leg up the rest of your league. So very similar to kind of how I viewed Hellebuck's season. Makar was that for the position on the blue line.
Yeah, to me, I honestly almost ranked Werenski as the best fantasy defenseman just because like he was such a transformative pick as well. Like ADP of 115, and he grades out as the 8th best player overall. He had a very similar season to Cale Makar. Cale Makar is ranked 3rd overall. Zach Werenski is ranked 8th overall in Yahoo Standard League. So like Cale Makar outperformed his ADP, but not quite to the extent of Zach Werenski. But Makar's still just slightly better numbers gave him the leg up for me. Let's move on to the biggest, they're the best goalie overall. We're not going to dive into it too much. We already talked about Connor Hellebuck a lot, but he was the number 1 best goalie this season without a doubt. Andrei Vasilevsky came in as a runner-up, and I think you mentioned it a little bit. Like, given how good Hellebuck was, like there were so many, and we're going to talk about a lot later in the show, so many goalie busts this year. So like if you hit the nail on the head with like a couple guys, like there was really only a handful that you felt really good about on a night-to-night basis. Like Igor Shesterkin, Ilya Sorokin really didn't have great seasons. They still ranked as like the 6th or 7th best fantasy netminers this year with pretty, substandard numbers comparatively to what they've done throughout their career. So like Hellebuck, Vasilevsky, Philip Gustafsson, maybe like those 3 were really the 3 that you could consistently rely on like the entirety of the season. Anthony Stolarz honestly was probably another name that you could throw in there that was for the most part pretty consistent, just without the same level of workload. Any thoughts on the best goalies overall before we move on to their best draft day value?
No, I think, Gustafsson probably is, just kind of eking in that conversation, but Hellebuck and Vasilevsky are, if you look at the wins leaders among the league right now, they're the only 2 that are, as you said, consistently giving you excellent splits as well. I think Ottinger had a really nice year from a fantasy perspective, but yeah, he's a little more shaky night in and night out and probably cost you your splits in some given weeks. But I did give Stolarz the 5th vote. I think in category leagues, like he was just so dominant pretty much all season. Like you said, he had about a 2-week stretch there midway through the season where things were a little bit shaky, but and it looked like Wall might be gaining some control of the crease. But basically, ever since that point, like he started the season so incredibly well. Obviously, finished it 8-0, 3 shutouts in his last 8 starts. So in those category leagues, like Stolarz won championships, right? In points leagues, it's a little bit different because he's basically only playing every other night and obviously not getting the workload like we talked about with the Hellebuck or Vasilevsky, but I think in category league, Stolarz definitely deserves that shout out for sure.
Well, I mean, too, like I just talked about Kucherov and Pastrnak getting hot at the right time. That's exactly what Stolarz did. And I'm sure Stolarz is going to end up on a high percentage of championship teams, just given the run that he went on late. One name that also garnered quite a few votes from us as best goalie that we didn't talk about, and we will get to him in a few minutes, but Darcy Kemper, just an outstanding season for him as well. Okay, biggest draft day value, our consensus best value was Zach Werenski, which, as I mentioned, outperformed his ADP by 107 spots. Just an unbelievable season. Did slow down a touch there, kind of right around the return from 4 Nations. The Blue Jackets offense kind of was a little bit quiet, but overall just an unbelievable season. But D, I had Werenski number 1, but you had Brandon Hagel number 1. What gave Hagel the edge over Werenski for you?
Well, I just wanted to give him a little bit of love. I thought he had a fantastic season. I figured Werenski was going to take it home either way, so might as well make sure that we get a chance to talk about Hagel. Probably didn't get a ton of love from us on the podcast because he was just kind of always doing his thing. It's not like he was drafted enough or he was drafted across the board, but where he was drafted, he ended up just delivering so incredibly well in terms of the return you got on that investment, right? Like he was, I believe, the 105th or 106th pick.
Yeah, 106th on average. And ranked 10th overall in Yahoo Standard League. So outperformed his ADP by 96.5 spots.
Yeah, and finished top 10 in the league in scoring. And there's only about 4 guys on that list who scored more goals than he did as well. And basically did all this damage at even strength, which is insane. Like he did this without getting a ton of exposure to that top power play unit. How many power play goals do you think he had this year?
4, maybe.
He had 0.
He ended up with 0. I remember talking about it mid-season that he had 0, but I figured he had at least scored some since then.
No, 32 even strength goals, 3 shorthanded goals, 0 on the man advantage, just 11 assists on the power play as well. So he put up 90 points with just 11 coming on the man advantage. So I just wanted to give him his due. He had a phenomenal season. And, he was a guy that we were probably a little bit scared of because we didn't know how those lines are really going to shake out. And it looked like, if Gensel's locked in there, what does Hagel really have to play with on the second line? But him and Cirelli just dominated play all season long when they got the chance to play together. And just wanted to highlight it because this is a guy that, his draft price is going to, I'm sure, skyrocket heading into the next season, but I will be all in on buying in on this guy because, again, he did all of this work at even strength, much more reliable year to year. And if he gets that additional exposure that he's frankly earned to this point on that man advantage with the likes of Kucherov and Gensel and Hedman, then we could really see him, push even further next year, maybe threaten to hit 100 points. So, just a fantastic season for Hagel. I think he really started to get his praise during the Four Nations tournament, and but really just from start to finish, one of the best players in the league, hands down, this season. So I thought he deserved a shout out and a little bit of love here on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, he probably could have made more of a push for this award. He also, similar to Rwinski, was a little bit sluggish coming out of the break. Him and Cirelli obviously both played Four Nations. They weren't quite as hot coming directly out of the break. They've started to heat up again here in the late stages of the season, and it's going to be fun to watch that line in the postseason as well. Let's throw it over to Beebs here, who his biggest draft day value was Darcy Kuemper.
Yeah, Darcy this year, for me, it was just the surprise of it all, of what he did. I think that people really stole him in drafts. I have his ADP across the board in about 4 different leagues at 111. So with that, you basically got him as your second or third goalie, and all he did was just fill every category as a top 5 goalie, basically. He was 6th in wins with 31, so okay, top 6. He was tied for first in goals against with Hellebuck with 2.02 goals against. He had a .922 save percentage for the third best in the league, and he had 5 shutouts for third best. I just think that this value holds its own because of how weak some of the other goalies were. We're going to talk about it later, but there was some huge names that just let us down in the draft this year. We saw Stuart Skinner. We saw Jeremy Swayman. We saw Alexander Georgiev. They all killed teams. So that's where I think a player like Darcy Kuemper really held his value, because if you did get hurt by these early goalies, you now just got a new number one goaltender. But also, if you had a number one goaltender, you just made your goaltending that much better, and you have an incredible trade piece, because goalies were just, if you had one of these top 5 goalies this year, you were hanging on to gold. You could trade them for basically anything. And Kuemper was fantastic. I believe at 1.4 or 5 weeks in, I said, I think I'd rather have Kuemper than Stuart Skinner. But at the time I was like, it's kind of a dumb comment because we know what Kemper's done the last couple of years. And then it happened. So thank you, Darcy, for making me look better. It makes me feel a lot better about that statement, because we've been stressing all year over it. But yeah, as far as value goes, I think that the goaltending position just lacked so much. There just lacked any type of leaders. That's why I had to put him up here. Granted, some of these other players that stepped up and that we have ranked up here as biggest value, they were huge value, but just nothing compares to what you got in net from Darcy Kuemper this year. And that was just so unexpected. I love it.
Let's move it along now to the biggest bust of the season. We were kind of all over the map here. The consensus biggest bust of the season ended up being Chris Kreider. Not surprising. It's a player that we talked about a lot throughout the entirety of the season. And honestly, like, he was maybe a little bit better in the second half of the season, not much better. Beebs brought up a good point earlier, that like Kreider was basically just like droppable. So he didn't like crush you. Like, yeah, you wasted the pick on him, but at least you didn't hold on to him all season long, which was not the case with some of these guys, right? Like the Elias Petterssons, like you couldn't really cut bait unless you were able to trade them. It was tough. But I'm going to go first here just really quickly. Thatcher Demko took this top spot for me as my biggest bust. And I'll talk about him a little bit later in the show, because he was actually my bust goalie in the preseason, but really nobody underperformed quite as much as he did. He was drafted 65th overall and ranks 551st. So 485 spots below his ADP. The only player that was drafted over 90% that underperformed their ADP more was Jeremy Lauzon, which I'm not really sure why he was drafted in 91% of leagues. Obviously, banger leagues were really falling in love with him. Again, probably not all to the fault of Thatcher Demko, but on draft day, I said, like, I'm not paying this price for a guy that we don't even know when we're going to see him. He ended up not making his debut until, I think, mid-December, if I remember correctly. So, he was just he had bust written all over him, and boy, was he ever a bust. But D, you had another goalie. Who was yours?
Yeah, Alexander Georgiev. And to Beebs' credit, like, this kind of speaks to the same thing. Like, the one benefit, I guess, with Georgiev was you were able to move on from him pretty quickly once that trade happened. And, I'll hold my hands up. I wasn't, all in on Georgiev. And, if you listen to the preseason episodes, it was still, too early in the draft where I was really looking at the position, but I did have him ranked inside my top 10 just because I felt like, whoever was getting the starts for Colorado is going to be worth owning in fantasy hockey. We saw how that played out with Blackwood and even Wedgwood when he was getting starts following those moves that they made. But, certainly, obviously in the preseason can't predict this kind of trade that was about to go down. We knew there was some risk with his play, but yeah, you were basically able to drop him once he got the move over to San Jose, a guy that's underperforming and now moves to one of the worst teams in the league. Not going to hold a lot of fantasy value, but it still just hurts you so much, right? Like this is a top 50 selection that you burned on him, late fourth, early fifth round pick, and he's just completely unusable within a month into the season. And on top of that, like that month that he was with Colorado, you were still playing him night in and night out because the Avs were favored night in and night out. Yeah. And he probably set you back pretty heavily to start off the season and really had you playing from behind the 8-ball. And then again, the value you lost on draft day. So, Swayman, I think, is another one that could have potentially, and I think Beebs is going to speak to that as well. But at least with him, he had some value the whole season. Like, yes, it was really disappointing in terms of what you were hoping for, and another guy that we highlighted heading into the preseason. But at least with him, like you still, somewhat serviceable.
You could be choosy with your matchups with him at least, and still maybe get some positive out of him. But like Demko, he was on your IR all year for the most part, and Georgiev just absolutely dreadful. As you mentioned, 53rd overall ADP. Grade zone is the 413th best player, has underperformed his ADP by 360 spots. But as you mentioned, Beebs went with Jeremy Swayman. So Beebs, why do you think Jeremy Swayman was the biggest bust this season?
Yeah, this was a personal choice. And I got absolutely burned by Swayman in a couple leagues. And realistically, there is a case here over Kreider, in my opinion, because Kreider was so bad during the early part. I think if you kind of got rid of it, if you learned early on, you could get away from that. He wouldn't have stung you for all 82 games. The issue with Jeremy Swayman is he was Jeremy Swayman. No one was ever dropping Jeremy Swayman. I did it probably around game 70, but at that point, you even felt bad. Just like, I just dropped Boston's starting goaltender, one who just got a huge contract, one who was a top 10 consensus goalie coming into this season, and he hurt you all year. He didn't just hurt you, though. He absolutely decimated your goaltending stats. His ADP was 50.7, so you likely took him as one of your top 5 picks in any of your leagues, and he was your first goalie to go off the board. But then he proceeded to only get 22 wins, which is good for 26th in the NHL. It's tied with names like Calvin Pickard and Samuel Urson, 2 names you could have grabbed throughout the year at any point and gotten the same type of win production. He had a 3.11 goals against average. That was 48th best in the league. But he paired that by leading the NHL in goals against this season with 176. So if you are in a category league or just a stat or just any type of league, he's destroying you. And then just one more for the road, 892 save percentage, which was 49th best in the league. He basically is the bottom in all stats. And as I mentioned, he really, really hurt you because you had that hope all year that he would be Jeremy Swayman of previous. And when he continued to hurt your team, and Boston continued to get somehow worse as the year went on, and the Joe Sacco thing didn't work, it destroyed fantasy teams. So Jeremy Swayman, you're my bust. It's kind of why he also outdid Alexander Georgiev. It would have been Georgiev for sure, but I think people learned they could have dropped Georgiev 4 months ago once he got traded right away. So that's why the Swayman thing hurts. We lasted too long. We waited too long. We had too much hope, Jeremy. But I will say, I do believe, I don't want to spoil any sections, but I do believe that, Brock, you sniped this one from a mile away in our opening show. So if you're listening to Brock Segan, as you should, then you didn't even have to worry about this guy busting your lineup.
And now let's wrap up our Fantasy Hockey Awards with the best free agent pickup. And you just mentioned him. It is Mackenzie Blackwood from the Colorado Avalanche. Beebs, take it away here with why Blackwood was the best free agent pickup.
Just give me a second here to stop dancing, because Mackenzie's probably the reason that I made it to the finals or did so well in a lot of leagues. As I mentioned, I had Swayman stock, and I also had Stuart Skinner stock. So having those 2 goalies, I really needed something to save my season mid-year, and I was in panic mode. I didn't want to trade a superstar. I didn't know what to do. And then next thing you know, Colorado makes a nice little trade with San Jose at about 3 p.m. on a Wednesday when stuff's quite quiet. Well, because that happened, I was able to sneak in and grab him in all leagues, and he proceeded to just be sensational. A basic 1A goalie. If you look at the numbers, Mackenzie Blackwood ended the year. Hilarious. Go look up his ADP. You will not find one. No one drafted Mackenzie Blackwood to head in, which is awesome because that means you got a goalie off the wire who finished 12th in wins with 28, 13th in goals against average with a 2.5 goals against, and 9th in save percentage with a 912. As I mentioned, kind of with Darcy, there just wasn't much goalie to go around, and you needed help wherever you could get it. And that's kind of where Mackenzie Blackwood came in. A lot of people thought that whoever stepped in for Colorado would pull the low save percentage, kind of like we've seen from Georgiev, high win situation, which, has value in itself. But Blackwood decided to fill all categories, which was kind of nice. It's good to see what a talented goalie can do in a system like that. And with that said, you basically picked up your number one goalie, or call it your number two goalie for the year, off of free agency. And I just don't think that there's more value in anyone else in the league than that. Blackwood will certainly be a top 10 goalie off the board not certainly, but most likely off the board next year. So that's pretty crazy what a team trade could do. And yeah, I will say, as someone who had their season saved by Mackenzie, he is certainly my free agent pickup of the year.
The key really is that he was picked up or traded like in the middle of the afternoon, in the middle of the week. And it was just like, if you were paying attention to Daily Faceoff, or you work at Daily Faceoff, you were able to scoop him up quite quickly. And he turned into an absolute stud. He turned into everything we thought that, Alexander Georgiev could be, and really kind of was in the couple seasons previous, like able to win 40 games. But like Blackwood actually was a good goalie and actually put up good splits. Just an absolutely tremendous pickup overall. I am going to switch gears a little bit here because my best free agent pickup is Morgan Geekie. And it's very similar to why Kucherov and Pastrnak ranked so high for me in the fantasy hockey MVP conversation. But Morgan Geekie, he single-handedly eliminated me in our big money league. Like, I played against the number one seed, but then he also picked up Geekie at the right time. And Geekie was just insane. He was so good during the fantasy hockey playoffs. Since the start of week 22, the fantasy hockey playoffs, Morgan Geekie led the NHL in goals, tied with John Tavares with 11. Just insane. His 22 points during that time was fourth best in the NHL. Like, he was just unbelievable down the stretch at the right time of the season. So, yeah, maybe you weren't getting great value out of him the entirety of the season, but if you scooped him up before the start of the playoffs, he might have won you a championship by himself. So that's why he was the best free agent pickup for me. A little bit different than kind of what you guys were going with Blackwood and Geekie. Do you have anything else to add on Blackwood? You also have Lane Hudson number 2 on your list, which was obviously a ridiculously good pickup as well.
Yeah, no, I those are just two guys, in my opinion, Blackwood or Hudson, that just kind of, if you came out a little bit short on draft day, these were top 10 options at the position that ended up being available on the wire. I mean, Hudson probably got taken towards the end of a lot of leagues, especially more competitive leagues, but he came out pretty good and then kind of tailed off a bit in that first month of the season, right? So I know he ended up on a lot of free agency and free agency pools and waiver wires early on in the season. And because I picked him up in one, another one I dropped him and then grabbed him back again. So, but yeah, the production you got off him, and we talked about it all season long. It's why we love Jackson Lacombe so much in the second half of the season. Finding that kind of production at the defense position in fantasy hockey and the free agency pool, the waiver wire, just does not happen very often. So to get a guy that was just so consistent, for basically the last 5 months of the season, just a real weapon for your fantasy team. Like I said, could really just make that transform if you didn't invest highly at the position on draft day and you were able to strengthen out your roster elsewhere. And Blackwood, same thing, but in goal. And then, otherwise I think, Kirill Marchenko had a great year. We talked about him a lot all season long. Dylan Strome, Rickard Rakell, all guys that were, worthy and deserving of consideration for this prize for sure. But just the position scarcity at the goaltender and defense put Blackwood and Hudson a step above for me.
That is going to do it for our Fantasy Hockey Awards for the 2025 season. Now let's revisit our mid-season bold predictions and see how we did. We will start with Beebs. Beebs, your first bold prediction was that Jackson Lacombe will finish the season top 10 in defenseman points.
Yeah, this was tough. I kind of expected Lacombe to just keep his trajectory as a offensive beast going. And while he kept the shots on goal intact, everything else point wise kind of didn't flow. One of the things that happened, well, it was happening before, and I thought maybe Jackson Lacombe would help flip this switch. Their power play needed a bit of help, and it just proceeded to not improve at all, even though he was playing quite well. They finished the year 32nd in the NHL with 11.9% power play. So that really didn't help Lacombe push himself into the top 10 in scoring. He ended up 21st in the league in scoring, so 11 spots out, 12 points from the 10th position. Actually, at the time that we did the episode, I believe he needed 14 or 15 more than the 10th place guy to then surpass him, which showing that he's 12 out, he really didn't make that much space since I talked about it, unfortunately. But what kind of hurt that was he had 1 point in his last 7 games. That didn't really help much, and 8 points in his last 15. That's pretty solid production, but it wasn't the production I needed if he was going to push into that top 10. So Jackson, you gave us value. You were sensational all year, but being on the 29th scoring Anaheim Ducks shot in the foot. So it was a bold prediction, but I think we still got our value out of Jackson, so I'm cool with it.
Honestly, if Jackson Lacombe didn't cool off down the stretch, he probably would have been one of the best free agent pickups for us. He was a guy that a lot of us had stocks in, and he was just tremendous down the stretch. But Beebs, you had a second bold prediction as well, and it was that Dmitry Voronkov will outscore every second-year player in the second half.
Yeah, that certainly did not happen. Voronkov decided he would take a step back. The second that episode aired, I believe, he was like, oh, hey, Beebs believes in me. I do not believe in myself. I will tell you that. End of the year, still with a respectable 22-46. But what really killed him, shot himself in the foot, was the 4 points in his last 17 games. We basically saw him get dropped off most fantasy rosters. He got dropped off the top power play. Things like Boone Jenner's return seemed to kind of hurt him, where I didn't really expect it to. As a winger, I thought Boone Jenner coming back as a center just meant we have another two-way center here. But Jenner decided to just come in and play whatever positions needed, jump on the wing, and put up a near point per game. And that, unfortunately, pushed my Voronkov off some of the people he was competing against. So he ended with 46. He was going against Connor Bedard, who ended with 64, had quite a good closeout there. Adam Fantilli, his partner in crime, 52 points, had a 30-goal season. So we love to see that. But he beat Voronkov. And then Logan Cooley leading all second-year players with 65 points out in Utah. So those were some tough ones to beat. He was 19 points out from Cooley, so we were not very close. But I will say, what we had during the season early on, Voronkov, it was beautiful, and I will not forget it. But you let me down late.
Yeah, the Blue Jackets cooled off, and Voronkov certainly was a part of that in a big, big way. But let's get to my bold prediction. And it was actually like threefold. It was all around the same player, but they all kind of worked together. So the first bold prediction was that Dustin Wolf would play 70% of Calgary's games down the stretch. Absolutely nailed that one. He started 30 of 38 games since that episode, which is 79% of the Flames games. The second part of the bold prediction was that Wolf would finish as a top 5 fantasy netminder and drag the Calgary Flames to a playoff berth. Honestly, so close. Wolf ended up finishing as the number 8 ranked goalie in Yahoo Standard Leagues. He was ranked number 73 overall, and the number 5 goalie was Ilya Sorokin, who ranks number 58 overall. So just 15 spots behind the top 5 fantasy netminder, narrowly behind Sorokin, Shesterkin, and Kemper were the guys just ranked ahead of him. So pretty close there. And then obviously he nearly dragged the Flames to the playoffs. The second half, like they literally might end up tying the Blues for points and just losing the tiebreaker. And what he did for them down the stretch was more than enough to get them into the playoffs. The problem is the Blues just turned into the hottest team in the league, and like what the Flames did should have been good enough, but the Blues just were slightly better, man. Like they just got that much hotter. And then the third part of my bold prediction was that Dustin Wolf, given this unbelievable second half of the season, would win the Calder Trophy. And this also feels like it's close. Like I feel like in any given year, Wolf probably did enough to win the Calder Trophy. But unfortunately for him, Lane Hutson had just an absolutely historic season on the Habs blue line and will likely end up winning Rookie of the Year. I think he's minus 3,500 now. So chances of Wolf pulling it off, not great, but I feel pretty good about that bold prediction. I was close. I think I was on top of it, and I had a lot of stocks in Dustin Wolf this year. Felt very good about him preseason. I'm glad he was able to turn into the goalie we thought he was, and I'm excited to see kind of where he goes in drafts next year. I think he's going to be an interesting name to follow. I think it's just an interesting team. I'm interested to see what that team does in the offseason. Are they kind of like an all-in mode and kind of trying to build off what they did this year, especially with a young goalie playing as well as Wolf did this year? But D, your bold prediction was that Jack Eichel would win the Hart Trophy. I guess it wasn't technically. Your bold prediction was that he would be a finalist, but then that wasn't bold enough. So you went win. Don't know if it's going to happen. What do you think?
Does not seem like it. He's not being offered on the outrights for Hart Trophy right now. It's just the four, Kucherov, Draisaitl, McKinnon, and Hellebuck, I believe, are the only four names being offered and the outright bets right now. But, I do think he's pretty close to being a finalist. I can't remember off the top of my head. A finalist is the 3 or 5 man list, but I'm sure he's going to get some votes for sure. And, the argument was kind of based around the Taylor Hall Trophy that happened a few years ago now. Felt like he was just head and shoulders, the most productive player on his team. It's not quite the level of disparity that we saw with Hall when he had about 90 points. The next closest was, I believe, Heischer with him somewhere in the mid to low 50s. This year, Eichel finishing with 93 points. I believe 7th in the league in scoring. Mark Stone second on the Golden Knights with 67. So, honestly, I don't think I was too far off here. I think if he scores a few more goals, which I was kind of hoping for, that shooting percentage just never really bounced back throughout the course of the year. But if he, just had a little bit better puck luck, maybe missed a few less games down the stretch and was able to break that 100-point mark and, really just kind of carried this team into where they finished in the regular season, I think he'd be getting a lot more talk than he is. And probably if, Hellebuck wasn't taking up one of those spots, which we don't normally see, but obviously with the year that he's had, we could very well see a goaltender take home the trophy this year. So I feel pretty good about it. Everything that I was kind of hoping would happen or fall into place pretty much did. It's just the fact that, Kucherov finished on such a tear. He's taken home a second straight Art Ross trophy. And like I said, Hellebuck winning the quadruple crown at the goaltending position is going to garner some attention as well. So I don't think we were too far off, but not going to happen, unfortunately.
Yeah, I remember when you said it, I was like, I hope so, because I had a Jack Eichel preseason MVP bet, and I was like, hey, if he's right, we're going to be onto something here. But let's now revisit our values, our value picks from the preseason, and also our ADPs to avoid from the preseason. So we're going to go through the 5 ADPs to avoid the 5 values that we liked on draft day. Just go through them quickly, see how we performed. We'll start with Beebs, who his center value was John Tavares. His left wing value was Patrick Laine. His right wing value was Lucas Raymond. His D value was Aaron Ekblad, and his goalie value was Jonas Korpisalo.
We'll start with the man himself, contract year John Tavares. This one was quite obvious from a mile away. He'd done it all before. He just had a down year last year, and with that came some down rankings as we headed in. John Tavares ended the year, though, with a sensational 74 points in 73 games. That was 38 goals and 36 assists. He absolutely proved he's got a bit left in him in the tank, and with that, you got 50. He basically performed 59 spots better than his value out of the gate, and with that, that's pretty impressive when he's in the top 100 already. So that means he made the jump into the top 50. So we love that from Tavares, and with the sensational team in Toronto around him, it was always going to happen. Another one here, my second best would be Lucas Raymond out in Detroit. And actually, he could have helped me out a bit more if he would have kind of kept it going these last couple of weeks, but he struggled. So it brought his numbers down a little bit. He had a week last week where he didn't even have a point. But with that said, he came in at 96.5 ADP, and he gave us 54 overall value. So that'd be a 42 spot jump for Lucas Raymond, who had 78 points in 80 games. That one was another one where it's just a player with a high ceiling who was in a great spot. He was likely to do well the whole time. And now my other one, my third one here, it actually likely might have had some value, but he decided to, we'll just say he decided to be a bad boy. And that's Aaron Ekblad out in Florida. Ekblad went at the 122 spot. So you really took him as your third or fourth D. You kind of took him on the chance that he would run Florida's power play 1, which we know how effective Florida is and how effective that power play can be. Well, Ekblad was on pace for a career high in assists. And then we know what happened with the 20-game suspension. So you were only able to get 56 games out of him. But in those 56 games, you got 33 points, which is not terrible. A lot of it you got after the first 20 games of the season. So if you did manage to grab him when he was re-put on the top power play, you got some value. But overall, it's kind of a wash on this one. The suspension obviously doesn't help anything. Patrick Laine was always going to be a bit of a loss just due to the injury. We knew going into the season that we would be missing likely 20 to 30 games. And that's kind of exactly what happened. Laine delivered right away out of the gate. He was scoring like a machine on the power play, but he was still scoring like a machine. In the end, he ended up giving you 20 goals in 51 games, which is really not bad. So if you stashed him, you still got value out of that. And then we'll take a loss here because Boston's just been dunking on me in the net all day. But Jonas Korpisalo was my final value pick. And the reason behind the original choice was the fact that Jeremy Swayman hadn't signed his contract. And I was kind of banking on the fact that you might get some free starts out of Korpisalo on what was a good defensive team. Joke's on me. Not a good team, not a good defensive team. And Jeremy Swayman signed before game one even started. With that said, Korpisalo took some starts, played well. And if you spot started him during the beginning stages, you got an okay something out of it. If you spot started him late in the season, you probably got screwed. So Korpisalo, I think next year I'm going to take the approach of not going after someone who hasn't signed yet because you never know what could happen. But overall, I think decent value here. I'm very happy John Tavares decided to show up and show out. That was fantastic. So overall, a successful audit of our value picks.
I remember in the preseason, like just not knowing where to rank John Tavares. And I think I still ended up having him ahead of ADP. And I'm glad I did because in my projections, he just kept popping up. I'm like, this feels a little too high. But I just kind of trust the numbers always with my rankings. And boy, am I happy that I did so because he just had an unbelievable season. D, you're a resident Maple Leafs fan here. Like, what do you think has changed with John Tavares this year? That's like, obviously he's always been very good offensively, but he feels like he's kind of reached a new gear than what we've seen in the last couple of years this year.
Yeah, I think, a big part of it just has to do with Nylander too and how well that he's played, and Tavares being able to be a little bit more of a passenger on that line at 5v5 and Willie really taking care of the zone exits and entries. And, Tavares' biggest issue, especially as he's gotten older, is his foot speed, right? So that really wasn't an issue when you pair him with a guy like Nylander and how well that he played. But yeah, really just seemed to have a keen focus on getting to the right areas and getting as much shots off from those high danger areas as possible. And looked honestly like the best scoring threat outside of Nylander on the team for the whole of the season. I think the other thing was like the power play really didn't have too many cold spells this year, unlike kind of what we've seen in the last few years. And he was obviously a big part of that as well, and got a lot of easy looks up front on the power play as well. So yeah, he had a great year. Maybe the impending free agent status, like Mitch Marner had.
Yeah, the contract status.
Yeah. So, but yeah, he's been great to watch all year, and hopefully keeps it going into the postseason.
My values were, I had Nazem Kadri at center, who ADP was 155.7. He ranks currently as the 61st ranked skater, so outperformed his ADP by 95 spots. So obviously feel pretty good about that. Really had a strong second half of the season too. So we actually talked about him as a buy low candidate at one point. Hopefully you were able to pull the trigger because he was a guy down the stretch that really would have helped you into the playoffs and in the postseason as well. My left wing value was Clayton Keller, whose ADP was 71.6, currently ranked 23rd overall, so outperformed his ADP by 49 spots. Feel pretty good about that. Just an outstanding year. That offense really took a step forward. I'm excited to see another year of growth from that team. Guys like Dylan Gunther, Clayton Keller, Barrett Hayton, Logan Cooley. It's going to be exciting to watch that team develop into next season as well. And I think Clayton Keller will undoubtedly be a top, at least 40 pick, I would say, next year. Always seems to be a guy that ends up being a little bit forgotten on draft day, though. So next on the list for me was my right wing value, which was Cole Caulfield. ADP was 80.7. Finished at or is currently ranked number 43 overall. So performed his draft day stock by 38 spots. So another hit there for me. Honestly, I thought that there was probably a little bit more out of Caulfield this year. Like he had a good year. I think that there's still more to offer. But overall that top line had a really good year, and he was a great pick on draft day. My D value, my main one was Shane Gostisbehere, who looked great at the start of the season. The reason I mentioned Zach Werenski on the show as well, and the reason I didn't was because I basically do Zach Werenski every single season, and it felt like I was like, okay, I can't just do this every year. This would have been the year to just make him like my undoubtable pick, but reminder that Werenski was picked 115 and ranks 8th overall right now. Between the pipes, Tristan Jarry, not great. Very, very bad. But at least picking up some of the slack was the fact that my breakout was Dustin Wolf. So I was like somewhat right, somewhat wrong. And I went back and looked and I wrote up my best ADPs to target at each position. And one of them was Jari, but the other two were Dustin Wolf and Philip Gustafsson. So if you read that article and just didn't fall for the Jari part of it, you were laughing with Gustafsson and Wolf. So all in all, I think my values were pretty solid. I went 4 for 5 in terms of actually improving their value from draft day. So D, your values, you had Tage Thompson, Nikolai Ehlers, Jordan Kyrou, Shea Theodore, Joey Daccord. Feels like a very good year for you as well.
Yeah, I think we pretty much killed this across the board. Tage really coming on late helped out. I felt like, what we saw of him in the second half last season suggested he could be that, not quite 50 goal scorer he was a couple of years ago. I think it was 47. And we're basically got back there, right? I think he's at 44 right now on the season. So just an elite goal scorer, and you could get him at the back of the 4th round. It felt like a no-brainer to me, and a guy that we'll be talking about in the late 2nd round next year, and that's kind of exactly how that played out. So feel really good about that one there. I had Tage pretty much, I think, out of 4 of my 5 leagues, and certainly did a lot of heavy lifting, especially down the stretch, giving me the best possible look going into the fantasy playoffs.
I looked yesterday. Just quickly on Tage Thompson. I looked yesterday. I think it was his last 35 games. He's scoring at a 60-goal pace. Like, he's just been insane in the second half of the season.
Looks really, really good. And I think him and Paterka are 2 names that we're going to want to pay a lot of attention to once again on draft day next year. Ehlers, not a fantastic year, but it was felt like a low hanging fruit. Like, this is a guy just way too low of an ADP at 141. He's going to give you a really solid baseline. And if he's ever going to get that increase in ice time and potentially play on that top line, he still has potential, I think, that we haven't seen from him yet over the course of a full season. So again, he was a bit limited in his usage and didn't get enough exposure to the likes of Scheifele and Connor at 5v5, but still a really productive year and easily returning on that ADP of 141.4 at the back of the 12th round. Jordan Kyrou, again, this is just a guy, it's just overlooked every single year on draft day. 129 was the ADP. I believe he's ranked about 75th in standard leagues right now. It's not a tough one to explain, right? I mean, just look at him. The shot volume is so consistent year to year. The assist production is so consistent. It just feels like you can bank him for 70 points, around 35 goals each and every season at this point in his career. And that's exactly what he delivered. 36 goals, 34 assists for clean 70 points in 82 games. Misses so little time as well. It's the 2nd straight season that he's played in every single game. So just a really, really reliable player going way too late in drafts. So again, that one felt like an easy one. Shea Theodore, man, if this guy didn't get hurt, this would have been another slam dunk. He still finished 11th amongst defensemen in scoring and points on the season, 111.2 ADP. I had Theodore in a lot of leagues. He just felt like a really good target. Again, it's not a position that I love investing at early. So to be able to wait and get him kind of in the, around the 9th, 10th round, I think you were really rewarded. Obviously sucked that he missed about a month and a half there with the injury during the 4 Nations tournament, but still, whenever he played, he was extremely productive and could have been looking at a 65, 70 point season if he managed to stay healthy. And then Joey Daccord, I just think he's a great goaltender, and maybe a little bit fatigue got to him down the stretch. But at the time, it felt like, going into the season, it was like he was still going to be splitting time someone with Grubauer. That just didn't make sense at all to me. He's clearly outperformed him for the last 2 seasons coming into this year. And Grubauer got the start on opening night, and that was probably the last time we could have referred to him as the Kraken starting netminder this season. So I just really liked, wasn't a lot of win upside in terms of the fact that, you don't really expect him to be contending this season, which obviously did not come to fruition, but I just felt like he could turn into an absolute workhorse and give you some solid splits and pick up enough wins that he'd be a really, really strong value at the 157.4 ADP that he was. And I think, that came to fruition throughout the course of the season. I don't think there's anybody that was worth starting night in and night out that got as big of a workload at that point in the draft as Joey Daccord. So a really, really good late target if you're like me and don't like spending on the position early.
Yeah, I mean, Joey, you just listen to the podcast again if you avoided the Jari bomb, but Wolf and Decord late, you were, at least in somewhat serviceable hands. Probably had to be a little bit more choosy with their matchups at times. But Decord also felt like a guy this year that just got super streaky, right? Like he would go on stretches where he'd win 5 in a row with just unbelievable numbers. And just to correct you, one thing you said about Jordan Kyrou ranked 75th, he's actually ranked 32nd. So he's been really good, top 35 player so far this season. I remember Kyrou's ADP was like way lower even than that too. It was like 135 or something. And he was like one of the guys we saw his ADP rising, but still ended up with an ADP of 121. Made absolutely no sense. Just such an easy pick there. But to return top 35 value, just insane. Let's now get to our ADPs to avoid. We don't like to call them bust because they're not necessarily bust. We'd probably take them if they were drafted a little bit later. But ADPs to avoid on draft day. We'll start with Beebs. He had Sebastian Aho, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, Adrian Kempe, Morgan Riley, and Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen.
Yeah, so on this one, it was Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen was the one where we definitely, I think we absolutely slayed this one. Coming in, it was almost a carbon copy of what had happened the year before with Devin Levi. He was drafted around the 80 to 100 range, proceeded to just struggle immensely, and then not really help us by season's end. And we've kind of seen that happen with Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen this year. Obviously, no one expected James Reimer to go nuts and kind of take over the crease out there these last couple games. But realistically, you couldn't even roster Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen at the late moments of this year. And you drafted him as your second goalie, maybe even your first goalie if you let them slide. As we mentioned, Jeremy Swayman's numbers obviously quite bad with an 892. Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen had an 887. That is absolutely dreadful. He had a 320 goals against. He was second in the NHL in goals against, where Swayman took the honor as first. So this guy was just terrible in between the cages. And like I mentioned, you probably were banking on his upside and made him your first goalie off the board or your second. So if you did that, you hurt yourself quite a bit. Another one that I'm quite proud of, but quite obvious, was Morgan Riley out in Toronto. His ADP was 77 heading into the year, which I was just like, why is it that high? He's not a goal scorer. We saw it happen one season, but he is not a natural goal scorer. And he's proven that with 41 points in 80 games played. He only has 7 goals to go with that. Basically, value you could get from a lot of defense off the wire at any point during the year. So Morgan Riley, that was a nice little bust for me there. The final one where I did quite well, and thanks to our buddy out in Edmonton, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, his preseason draft ranking was 72.5, which just blew my mind. And I remember mentioning if he falls off that top power play, we're going to be in for some trouble here. And he fell off the top power play at certain points, and we were in for some trouble there. And when that happened, it was not pretty. And if you drafted RNH with one of your first, say, 8 picks, he basically was holding no value for you. We saw him put up 49 points, 20 goals, and 29 assists in 77 games. He was on your roster all year. At least with Patrick Laine, you got 20 goals, but you had him on your IR for 30 games. With RNH, you got 20 goals, but he played every single night. So that's not what we're shooting for. And that makes him a good bust. Someone who kind of was a wash that I'm fine with this one. It's Sebastian Aho out in Carolina. Preseason, he was a 41.6 preseason ranking, and he ended up 46. So he really didn't go anywhere. He kind of just stayed in the spot that he stays in. He's Sebastian Aho. He had 74 points in 79 games. He had 29 goals and 45 assists. So he might not even hit 30 goals. So I'm totally content with having him as a bust there at that 46 pick. Now, it was always going to not be pretty because I attack this guy every single season. But Adrian Kempe, he was the one that proved me wrong on the bus show. He came in preseason 47.2, and in standard Yahoo leagues, he ended the year 27th ranked overall. Now, he is a category stuffer across the board. He gets the hits, he gets the shots, yada, yada. He ended the year with 71 points in 80 games played. So in a league that doesn't count hits, he is much lower down. But for now, if you're in one of those general leagues, which I did mention when we did the show, he gave you a little bit better value and didn't bust as expected. Part of the bust that I was kind of banking on was other players in LA taking a step forward, and they really didn't. More so, he just didn't give them the opportunity to because he played so well. So Kempe, I promise I will stay away from you next year. You will not be on my bus show, and that'll be a Christmas miracle.
Beebs will just forever hate. on Adrian Kempe, and it will forever not work. My ADPs to avoid, again, I think I did pretty well here. The first one was Vincent Trocheck. His ADP was 61.5. He delivered 78th ranked performance. So, almost fair value on draft day. It fell just a little bit high. Honestly, the Rangers as a whole struggled this year, and it probably held Trocheck back a little bit. He wasn't a terrible pick, but I would have much rather had. I remember writing it up in my draft kit at the preseason. You could basically replicate Trocheck's value with Nazem Kadri, who went like 190 picks later. So that was the real reason why I was like, I'll take Nazem Kadri and just pass on Trocheck and grab somebody else in that spot. And that worked out really, really well for me. Brad Marchand was next. Left wing, his ADP was 72.8, ranked 152nd overall, so nearly double his ADP. Injuries were obviously a bit of an issue this year, but the Bruins were in a decline. We kind of all saw that coming. Also, he's getting up there in age. Just felt a little bit too early for me, so feel pretty good about Brad Marchand being an ADP to avoid. Sam Reinhart was kind of my only miss. I just looked at his shooting percentage last year. I was like, this can't possibly continue. But insert the Jesse Pinkman gif where he just can't keep getting away with this because he just does. He's just unbelievable. So I am done. Unlike Beebs, where he's just not learned not to doubt Adrian Kempe, I'm going to learn quickly and just stop doubting Sam Reinhart. He is a legitimate goal scorer that can shoot 25%, no problem for a season. Next was Devon Taves. He seems to be like him and Charlie McAvoy seem to be my Adrian Kempe. I just target them every year. They're just ADPs that aren't ones that I enjoy. A lot this year, 96.5 ADP, ranked 122nd overall this year. So about 2 full rounds worse than where he is, which probably feels appropriate, right? If he was going around ADP 122, I would at least consider him. But like, there's just no avenue for power play one usage for him ever with Cale Makar on that team. He's able to get by with his 5v5 play, seeing so much ice time with Makar and McKinnon, but like, it just doesn't feel like the true upside is there as a top 100 pick. And then, as I mentioned earlier, my goalie ADP to avoid was Thatcher Demko, and I couldn't have done any better there. So again, all in all, I feel like it was a pretty good year for me. Looking back at the preseason, I think I had a strong season in terms of my values, my ADPs to avoid, and some of my breakouts really did extremely well as well. So pretty happy with all the results. D, let's get to you now to close out today's show and close out the Fantasy Hockey Podcast season. Your ADPs to avoid were Joel Eriksson, Chris Kreider, bingo, Brock Besser, Mikhail Sergachev, and Jeremy Swayman. Take it away.
Yeah, I mean, we'll start with Eriksson Ek. Like, that ADP just really didn't make a lot of sense to me. At 63.6, you got to spend, an early 6th-round pick on this guy. Felt like an easy regression candidate. And then on top of that, I think a lot of that value is has gone away in terms of what he used to offer in banger leagues. He's not hitting as much anymore. Obviously, didn't help his case that he got injured and missed as much time as he did, but finishing the year with just, 29 points in about 45 games. I think we hit that one on the head. Chris Kreider, I don't think we need to pour any more dirt on his grave in this episode. Brock Besser, tough year out in Vancouver. Again, one of the most obvious regression candidates coming into the season. ADP of 65.8. That was an obvious one to avoid. So hopefully you listened, because he did not return much value on that draft position. And then Mikhail Sergachev is probably the one that I slightly missed on. Depending on your format, he may or may not have returned value on his ADP of 74.4. I just felt like, there was going to be some competition for that spot on the top power play unit with Sean Durzi. He, to Sergachev's credit, basically maintained that spot for the course of the season. So good on him. Certainly had a very productive season for a blue liner. I didn't love the risk around the move and in terms of, what that spot on that power play could really offer, but they surprised me in a good way this season. So I will somewhat, take that one on the chin, but I do kind of stand by the fact that I thought there were better options a few rounds later in the draft, like Shea Theodore, and that you didn't quite need to spend that much on the position to get Sergachev with where he was going, but he had a good year. So it is what it is. And then the bust was Jeremy Swayman. Yeah, another one that I don't think we need to spend any more time talking about. At the breakouts, I got some work to do ahead of next season. We always talk about they're the hardest ones to hit, right? Because we're looking at guys and basically looking at talent profiles and maybe their production in smaller roles and hoping that they, get bumps in usage. So those are always going to be the hardest ones to hit, but had a tough year there. So it's good that we cleaned up as much as we did on the values in the bus. But Bedard for breakout center, I'll keep picking him every year. He's just too talented. Hopefully he gets a stronger supporting cast next year. Svechnikov for the wing. Yeah, I don't know why he can't carve out more of a role on that team than he's been able to, but another guy that I'm probably just going to keep pouring stock into, because I do think he can just be a cheap man's Brady Tkachuk if he ever gets that full usage. JJ Peterka, depending on what month of the season we're talking about Peterka, you either love that pick or you hated it, but really talented player. And again, like Tage Thompson, I think those are guys you're going to want to be keeping an eye on next year. Brock Faber, big disappointment on the blue line in Minnesota. And then Logan Thompson looked like maybe the pick of the year for the first few months, play tailed off, got hurt. Not even the first few months, first 5 months of the season. But yeah, tough finish of the season for Logan Thompson. But hopefully you were able to kind of patch up the position a little bit. It didn't hurt you too much when his play started tailing off. And obviously then he got hurt at the rest of the season. So he got you there, right? He put you in a really good spot heading into the fantasy playoffs, but obviously let you down when that time came. My
breakouts ended up being absolutely nails. Macklin Celebrini, I remember saying like it's weird to pick a rookie, but like I just felt like with his ADP at 152, I remember comparing him to Connor Bedard's ADP of like 38 in his rookie year. Just made a lot of sense. He was unbelievable. Celebrini's going to be easily a top, probably 50 player next year. Uri Slafkovsky, I think that was pretty accurate. Like definitely better in the second half of the year. He's probably my worst pick overall. Gabe Vilardi, I mean, he was well on his way to having that breakout season before getting hurt. Lane Hudson, another rookie. I just felt like he was just due to have a huge role and hopefully surpass Mike Matheson on PP1. And that obviously ended up coming to fruition later in the season. And then Dustin Wolf between the pipes, one with a lot of real young guys, and breakouts was certainly a strong suit for me. Beebs had some successful ones as well. Adam Fantilli, really, really good year for Adam Fantilli. Jake Neighbors, definitely a bit of a disappointment, but Dylan Gunther was great. Jake Sanderson was great. But Ivan Fedotov was a certain miss there between the pipes for Beebs. But as always, guys, thank you so much for tuning in every single week. It's been so much fun. Me, D, Beebs, we all had a lot of fantasy success this year. So hopefully you're tuning in, every single week. I just want to, again, just say thank you for, it's been 10 years, full decade. A lot of you guys have been with us since the start. It means a lot. Keep supporting the show. We appreciate it a lot. But I do want to mention, we are planning on changing up the format a little bit next year, going with more episodes in a week, maybe 5 a week, shorter episodes, bringing on guests, bringing on different personalities as well, just to kind of, give a different feel. There's going to be a lot more video stuff associated with this podcast as well, going up on our YouTube channels and stuff. So keep an eye out for that. It's going to be a lot of fun. But as always, we're going to be back in the preseason doing those massive positional preview breakdown episodes, getting you set up for your draft, which, we just showed you that if you listened, you probably left the draft feeling pretty good about your team. So as always, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you guys have a great summer. Stay safe out there. Hopefully your favorite teams have success in the playoffs, but hopefully more than anything, you won some fantasy championships this year. So if you did win any fantasy championships, please reach out to us on X at DFO Podcast. Let us know how many championships you won. Thanks again. See you guys back here in either late August or early September. Cheers.
Peace.